in aesthetic narratives. And when I say that, aesthetic narrative meaning that it creates a unique experience for a user to then engage with this data in a hyper unique way. I think the full value of three-dimensional spatial web kind of interfaces doesn't really come into effect until we have full-on XR and AR, and you can pull and zoom in a Minority Report style way in a full immersion within the room that you're in kind of thing. That's when the three-dimensional really has value. But in thinking in the long term, we need to be thinking and building for those technology sets that have yet to come into being. And then another note on this tool set, the potentiality for it to be a group sense making tool is really powerful. But something as simple as Product Hunt is also able to do that, right? So it's like these are two-dimensional things that can really bring value. And I think conceptually, I think that thinking about these tools in a way as well, where 3D isn't necessarily the only thing that it would do. I would want to see a tool that could change its data visualization aesthetic based on the user and kind of what the user preferred. So if the user prefers pie graphs, they don't necessarily need a three-dimensional interface. So I think this should be something that we're keeping in mind as well, is like the 3D is cool, but it adds to the aesthetic narrative. And in the long run, yes, it's a good thing because we're going to have XR and AR and VR and these types of things. But in the short term, we should also be thinking in more standard kind of data visualization and simpler methodologies as well, alongside of the three-dimensional, and allow the user to be able to pick and choose. Because ultimately, I think the hope, at least for me, is to be able to make sense of like, what are the DAOs that are actually doing good things, and how do we collectively point them out? And in doing so, that could be a 2D thing or a 3D thing. It doesn't really matter. So just bringing that into the conversation as well.
Speaking of visualization, do you guys know about Chernoff faces? I've always wanted a 3D version of this. I bet this is something you could do easily in XR Engine. It's basically a data visualization technique where you map the various parameters of a multidimensional data set to the attributes of faces, including like eyebrow angle, pupillary dilation, face like distance between the pupils, like eyes and so on. And so this lets you basically, recruit or exapt the incredible facial recognition circuitry that we already have built in to quickly identify sort of like interesting parts of the data. And so, for example, you could if we had let's imagine that we had a scale where like these DAOs seem to be basically like purely for profit in a sort of game A rivalrous sense. These DAOs seem to be purely community oriented. We could even make like, okay, well, the more pure profit oriented they are, like the meaner the face looks or whatever, right? But this would not be an arbitrary aesthetic decision. It would be data based. You'd have a face renderer as a visualization plugin that you could plug into your arbitrary data sets. I've always thought that this didn't get enough play, and the examples that you see of Chernoff faces, they've been very successful with like fucking hand-drawn cartoon type faces, for doing this type of visualization. But if you had a more three-dimensional, nicely shaded, I'm sure the XR engine could do this sort of thing, then that could be a pretty cool method of visualization, like specifically for the DAO map sphere or whatever, but also just in general. I've wished to have access to that for a while.
Yeah, not only I think that's a good idea, I think it'd be good to do it with emojis, because nothing is more Web3 than fucking emojis. What does the sweat bead mean on our Chernoff face map?
That's the Asian embarrassment, right?
I was going to say burn rate. Burn rate.
Evan, that's really cool. I like that. And I think, Christian, I was thinking about what you were saying of like, what's an example of this? And I think you gave a use case for DAOs and sense-making DAOs. And I think everybody's spoken to this, but maybe even like a silly example, or like a basic like DAO search engine. Say you come in looking to micro invest or something like that. You don't know a whole bunch, but you do know your value sets. And if there were some kind of way to analyze and categorize the DAOs on, you know, kind of like an ESG sort of thing, but not that. Maybe some kind of regenerative, whatever the criteria are that are open and visible. You can, you know, put like multi-vector spatial analysis of like, oh, the DAO, it'll serve you up DAOs that are like in closeness and proximity to your body. And so like maybe the DAOs that are most easily accessible to you are like right in front of your hands and your heart, all right? And maybe like there's a vector of like, you know, X, Y, Z axis of like the ones that are far away across the room or down on the floor are just like farther from your value sets. And so you're kind of using some spatial reasoning of like, oh, this is closer aligned with what I want to do or what I want to invest in. So I can look at it close. And that's just kind of like an experience design thing of like how you, instead of like a Google search or even a matrix or a relational database or any kind of standard 2D or data analytics on Web 2, like there's actually an experiential part, and maybe you can flatten that and look at it that way as well too, or get more information in that way. But even just engaging a fun kind of silly way to engage with maybe they're just little balls, little DAO balls, or you know, like energy balls, or you know, so it doesn't really matter. But I think to what the example that you gave of like this DAO does this for this reason and they do this better or they don't do that better, or so you have a kind of matrices of you know, important things that are potentially values aligned to those seeking the information.
Quickly, this also reminds me of the, you know, do you remember hearing about that thing where they put like a back pad on somebody who, I'm basically thinking of those times where you can remap the parts, like the senses that you have to essentially, it was like, I think it's like a way of giving somebody sight, is that somebody can then just like remap it into like the touch pads of your back. That's something I think is quite interesting about the experiential aspects, is you could actually have like different ideas or different data points as being something that actually is just feeding into your subconscious, so you can actually start going by feeling, you know, or things that you're able to start getting new senses basically just by the fact that this data is translated into something that you can feel or see, or yeah.
So I've got a quick question for Turquoise. So you mentioned being able to map the values of various DAOs over to the users. How do we tell what various DAOs values are? Is there a data set we can work with?
I'm thinking in terms of the economics, particularly so what's in the white paper. So I think we can look at their values, I think semantically, but that the expression of those values, I don't think in any real way may be measurable. I don't know. I have a guy who's like how to measure, he hasn't wrote a book on how to measure anything. So maybe I'd have to ask them. But I think in terms of economics, on how they are going, how close to regenerative economics is what I'm thinking of mapping to values in terms of like commons-based values versus, I guess, in the model of the game A, game B sort of thing. And I think, I guess it's rate their websites and say, hey, they purport to be like this. They're using these memes culturally. And I guess there can also be, so like, in the way of those who are in DAOs, there's this website about organizations, about the people who work at organizations. It's a little bit of a tangent, but it's basically surveys of people who work in their organizations and how well they rate their own organizations at matching the values and embodying whatever they speak, how well they treat their employees, yada, yada, yada. I don't know that exists for DAOs. I highly doubt it. And I think generally speaking, that kind of information is used for people who are looking to join those corporations. But it would be interesting, maybe potentially culturally, if you had internal surveys from those who are in that org. They say this about their own org, and there's some pretty scathing, and that's like a rating system. So there's that. There are, in the integral space, there's organizational values models, so stage theory. Some of my colleagues have done their PhD work on that. And I could share some of that with you if we want to use that, or how we want to use that, or if it even makes sense, or if it's useful, might be another discussion. but there are some ways that people have been attempting to do this using NLP and other actually interview assessments, qualitative assessments, and I think that's a much longer, drawn out processes, and I've only seen that in real life. So people's PhDs, people's books, and organizations that go to, or sorry, consultants that go to other organizations to kind of map how the value systems and structures. Is that a Glassdoor for DAOs? I'm familiar with Glassdoor.
Well, I'm just saying, you know, like the thing where you were talking about having both current participants in a space as well as former participants in a space offer both quantitative and qualitative ratings of what it's like to be in that space. That
Yeah.
basically is Glassdoor, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. Josh, I wonder if you have anything you want to kind of put into the middle to start transitioning the conversation over to the Bluepaper.
Yeah, still trying to process and synthesize all of that. So much great stuff. I think maybe for next week, it would be great to, and I'm gonna probably do some of this week, but get down what exactly the scope of the mapping project is. And then, yeah, next week we can orient around, I guess, creating an actual written plan for that. That feels like the natural next thing. Yeah, that notion of scope is going to be really interesting for the Bluepaper as well, I imagine, because as we keep bumping into, there is an infinite possibility space of what we could talk about, what we could do, what we could, yeah, it's so big. So that's my main concern, I suppose, is actually figuring out what the scope of what we want to include in this Bluepaper, as well as how we want to articulate it. And then you can bring in notions of, well, who is it for? Who's going to be writing it? There's a lot of questions there that I don't have explicit answers to, but do have certain leanings towards. My intention with the Bluepaper is, yeah, I suppose quite similar to the mapping, which is just to show it needs to act as a pointer towards the long-term vision of Conjure, as Dylan was kind of hinting at earlier, of essentially a toolkit and a tool making process and a digital social context that enables adequate sense making of complexity writ large, essentially, which is a whopper of a thing to try and do, but that's the endeavor. And I think one of the main things, the two main things I want to articulate in this Bluepaper, firstly, is the reframings I have written in that initial about document. They're very simple and concise. I think we want to articulate and explore those a bit deeper, as well as answering the why of those reframings rather than just the what. And the second thing is to articulate the necessary technological conditions to enable the cosmolocal regenerative digital infrastructure of the future, right? And Liam and Dimitri are two people who've been working on many aspects of the very kind of fundamental specs and innovations in this space. So it's great to have you guys here, because you can kind of pull us back down to earth when we kind of start getting really far into the weeds. So yeah, I guess it's the ethos and the logos of Conjure is what we need to articulate, rather than it very much is not a technical document. I would say it's an exposition of the reason why this is a game B oriented thing rather than a game A oriented thing, if that makes sense.
Can I propose an exercise?
Yeah.
What if we just write, like, you have a lot of the data diagramming, concept datagramming stuff. I threw some diagrams. This is pretty much a compendium of everything we like, right? And why don't we just start, bringing out the finger paints and actually just jump into one of these tools and try to draw all these things in one giant chart and see what happens, either together or apart, just between now and then the next meeting. Just an idea. Because I feel like we're on meeting 4 or whatever, and we're still talking about what we're doing. I was just gonna, at this point, I was like, let's break and play with some Lego blocks. That's just kind of my thinking.
Yeah, so to be clear, you're saying you've got some maps of interests that we haven't seen yet. Is that what you're bringing up, Josh?
I couldn't quite hear what you were saying. I think there was some interference on your microphone.
Oh, sorry. I was trying to. Liam was saying that you guys, I'm guessing on the XR side, have already put together some maps of what you're.
I was literally just going to say, let's all get a Figma into Figma and just start going through all the list of stuff we just made on this note sheet, and try to make one giant chart or a couple charts of concepts and groups and things, and see if we can conceptualize like the boundaries, the membrane of an MV, of some sort of MVP, right? Because we're trying to decide like what's the domain of information that we're going to focus on right now, right? Like I don't know. That's how I conceptualize the situation.
Well, I want to. Are you talking about the mapping process, Liam? When you say that the notes that we generated?
Can't really hear your microphone at all.
Yeah, Christian, I think that a couple times you kind of moved off to the side and weren't talking
He
directly into
asked,
your
is
mic.
he still talking about the mapping project? The notes that we're
Yeah, but
making
the same
from the
goes for the
mapping
blue.
project.
The same goes for this blue sky stuff, right?
Mhm.
I'm just trying to articulate some domains of what is our favorite stuff. What
Yeah.
if we are talking about the blue sky, like what are we going to tell in the stream? I don't know. So
Yeah, a few quick thoughts, and then I like the idea of kind of a jam session. One thing, at least as we've been discussing it previously, is that this Bluepaper would ideally serve the purpose of bringing more funding to Conjure. So something that can be offered as part of grant applications to more Web3 grants, with the idea that there's a lot of Web3 money out there, and there's quite a few grant opportunities for people who are heading up different projects. So there's to me the problem with this paper has always been, the problem to solve has always been, how do you get enough of the high level scope conversationally of the blue sky, as Liam was saying, and the bigger vision, call it game B, call it whatever. And then what's the necessary amount of grounding that you have to do in terms of roadmap and actual technology, so that it actually gets the interest in people who are discerning about that kind of thing. Because you might get some, if you just present like, here's the 100-year vision, you might get some amount of attention. But if you can say, here's what the technology you already have, here's kind of how we see it evolving, and here's how it's going to play a role in this kind of bigger vision of the future, I think you've got a much more powerful document that's going to get more collaborators and more funding. And I do think it'll be helpful along the way that Josh and Dimitri and Liam are all here to do that grounding bit, to talk a bit about what that, even if it's quite general, what that roadmap might look like in terms of the future of the technology you guys are building.
Yeah.
My volume better?
Yeah, it's better. So it's going to be the top of the hour soon, and I'm down to hop into a little doing sesh if there aren't any objections.
Yeah, and I'll explain this because maybe it's a little vague, but the way that the meeting is structured is it's 3 hours. The first hour is for the mapping. The second hour is for both mapping and the blue paper. And now we're about to start the third hour, which is just about the blue paper. At least in theory, that's how we're doing it.
So we're going through these notes, if I get it right, and we're looking to get our favorite bits and put that into a blue paper with the parameters that you just kind of defined and with what Liam suggested. Yes?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what Liam was suggesting. I don't know how congruent that is with like the blue paper itself. Like obviously there's some overlap in terms of the values that we're considering around the mapping project and the players and the audience and all that kind of thing. But they are two different projects. Like the blue paper is not a blue paper about the map, it's about Conjure broadly.
God. Sorry, I'm right behind Dylan. And we have what's the last hour?
The blue paper.
So 2 more hours on the blue paper, or 1 hour on the blue paper?
1 more hour on the blue paper.
Yeah, I have an idea of what we could do at a high level, which is a convergence across something that Josh already did, and a lot of the things that other people are talking a lot about out there, which is the looking at this just like, okay, there's a fundamental epistemic map of first person, second person, third person, and the relation between these. So Josh already put that triangle or hexagram together. And this is actually also something similar to that, which I thought was awesome from the Hansi Freinacht books. And those essentially, each of these, like not just the three, but the relations between them can be seen as distinct aspects of public life with game B that need to be in place in a community in order for game change to happen. Those and I not quite, yeah, it doesn't exactly align exactly the same, but you know what I should do? I should drop this, what I have, into a shared spreadsheet. You guys can look at it. I took a stab at doing a correlation between Josh's Conjure hexagram and Hansi Freinacht's 6 new forms of politics. I don't know if they align quite this way, but that is actually, I think, it could be a huge selling point for what we're doing. If we're talking about trying to get Web3 funding, a lot of these people are familiar with Hansi Freinacht, and having that sort of like, oh, we're playing with the terms that people are already talking about. the themes that people are already interested in. So let me just in a few minutes I'll send you guys the link to the Google Doc for the spreadsheet.
Yeah, one thing that what you were saying brought up for me, Brandon, which might be very helpful, is when me and Josh talked about Conjure before, multi-scoped kind of conversation.
Sorry,
And
Christian, can you get a bit closer to your mic?
how's this?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I wonder if I just started using the whole space on mute.
Nah, you've gone again. I wonder if it's your speakers. Are your speakers coming through your headphones? I
Yeah.
don't know why it's, yeah.
His
Weird.
Bluetooth, is your Bluetooth going out or
No, it's
something?
not.
While you sort that out, I'm going to grab my water bottle from the other room.
Do you have a boom on your headphones?
Did you guys hear that?
No.
Have you
No,
tried
I don't-
unplugging it and plugging it back in?
I'll try that real quick. Thanks for the
Tech support, somebody call tech
Jiggle the
support.
handle. Jiggle the handle.
Any better? Okay, doable. Anyways, what I was thinking is that it might be useful to have some type of tripart schema to divide the Conjure presentation into one that's maybe more, either third person, omniscient for those in the know, and then one that's, more second person and one that's more first person. Second person being about the community, relational aspects, and first person being about specific user experiences. And one thing I'll put into the middle that me and Josh had discussed previously was the idea of including something like a narrative, like an actual fictitious narrative about Conjure that shows the use in the future. Not anything too like cheesy, but just an illustration basically of what this technology looks like in situ, like 5, 10, 15 years from now. So adding in elements of augmented reality, of algorithmic machine learning feedback, and how that fits into someone's daily life. We were kind of playing around with solar punk narratives. Like what's like a day in the life of a solar punk, whether that's more urban or that's more like rural. How do the future of these technologies help facilitate more sovereignty, more X, Y, and Z? But with like an actual like illustrative example, a real color, some real color and narrative there. But I don't know if that's a great idea. It should be more abstract. And of course, we can always do both.
So I just dropped that new spreadsheet into the chat there. And there is, I think, a connection, with this, what Josh has. It seems that those lighter colored outer circles align with first person, second person, and third person epistemics. And then the darker, the ones that are shaded in the bluish greenish are the relations between them, right? And there might then be, if there is a way to, show that this is, talking a similar language as the Hansi Freinack books. I don't mean to, if it turns out there actually are distinct, then that's something we don't need to go down that road. That's just an idea, So it's worth the consideration that there might be a connection there. So here's where, and if you look closely, you'll notice it actually is a little bit different, because the way the Hansi Freinack books, they have it is first 2 second, second to second, first to first, etc. So might not be exactly in alignment there, but I just took a stab at it just as a suggestion. And, if this ends up being a dead end, it's cool. We just, let me know.
I definitely see the correlations here.
The book he mentioned is The Listening Society, right? Is the first one by
Yeah,
Hansi
and-
Freinheit.
Yeah, and actually it's the sequel, which is called The Nordic Ideology.
Nordic Ideology. The other one.
That talks about all of this stuff.
Got it. And I think you can only order that physically. Yep, there you go.
Yeah, maybe just thinking about those as you were talking about the idea of like visioning out what this could look like in the future, and sort of kind of reminded me of this film that I was watching yesterday. I've been a bit ill this weekend, I don't know if you can tell, but it was the film Tenet, and it was basically where they they have like, they can go inverted in time and then basically kind of plan out from the future, but everything all happens as it would do. You can't change anything. But what was interesting about it was the idea of seeing yourself as that protagonist in the future and trying to sort of reverse engineer the place that you're getting to from that idea that you've already gone through it. This was kind of it feels slightly related to the suggestions that I was making before about the about sort of pretending that you are from the future and having conversations about it, and how you would, almost approaching it as that kind of work of art, in the sense that you're projecting both the ecosystem and Conjure within the ecosystem in your imagination of where this can go in the future. So, I mean, that might be something to sort of take after the Bluepaper, like something that acts more as a sort of visualization of it in the, where it goes in like 5 years. I mean, this might be something that you can integrate into Conjure tech. I mean, I sort of think one of the most interesting pathways to the spatial web could be through mapping these ideas and these people and projects, and putting it into that frame of almost creating like a memory palace in the spatial 3D space, so you can understand where the different ideas and the concepts are battling out, where the different polarities are. So yeah, I mean, that's, I guess, I think it's kind of especially interesting once you bring in the physical world and give maps that we already understand and already relate to have something that you can kind of build upon. But I think there's something special there in the approach of looking at ideas and text modeling, or text representation or data representation, as a way to explore the idea space and create it for ideas. Because I think there you can also map it into the 2D space as well, or even just like an application or conversation. So yeah, but I'm happy to help out in the future with any of this sort of grand narrative visualization type of in sort of filmic form.
How far into the future are we thinking here? Are we thinking future after this technology takes root and everyone is completely psychologically reconditioned to a new reality future? Or are we thinking in the next few years future?
I mean, I've been trying to map this out myself visually as well. So if you're up for it, I can show you a quick kind of diagram that I've made on a whiteboard, if you're down for that, as possible kind of stages of which you could kind of tap into. But I don't want to take us off on a tangent. Just bit extra.
Sounds interesting to me.
I'll show it to you, and then if you give me a lot of thumbs up, I can give you a quick overview. Okay. Feel free to continue like chatting there.
I already love it.
Shall I just give you a quick overview of it?
Go for it.
Yeah, walk us through it.
Okay, I'll try and do this quickly.
Yeah, and just okay. If you bring the
Yeah.
camera closer, I might be able to read the text.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was going to be
Okay.
my request as
Okay.
well.
Yeah, so, okay, can you see this? Okay, so basically this should probably be like a circle, I think. But what I've been basically trying to map out is like, where are the different stages that we could vision it back from? So this is the kind of this is the solar punk storyline part. This is like projecting past what's labeled here as the great filter, just assuming that we've made it past this thing that would basically fuck up humanity. And there's the hyper object, which is almost the sort of data visualization aggregation part of understanding how we can progress through the great filter. This is whatever information we need to be able to go through it. And then below here is the grand narrative that almost brings it into the more kind of embodied human experience. So this would be sort of where you then project the storyline here into more of a grand narrative of how you might be able to get through that, or even just where it is today.
Real quick, Alex, the top
yeah.
is the now point, right? And so we're going more future as we go to the bottom, right?
Yes, yeah, it's a little, this is kind of slightly more, there's kind of this is essentially a kind of timeline upwards, and then I've got the singularity up here.
Oh, the singularity is at the top. Okay.
Yeah, so I just kind of went, okay, this
Thanks,
is like
Dimitri.
the sort of black hole point.
And the great filter is filtering civilizations who can't survive a meta crisis. Is that something like that? Boom.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so and then that's basically how it's coming into here. Is this is almost the sort of I mean, I've labeled it here as the having and doing mode, and having this, but they're essentially kind of the same thing. These would map onto the same part here. So down here is the metaverse simulation. So I think that would probably be more where Conjure would essentially be simulating this is, I guess, this ultimate sort of peak imagination of it, would be simulating the hyper object so that people can participate in it. So just below that is the cloud state that would be the sort of governing, whatever governance is allowing for this sort of simulation, what is injecting the human element into the simulation part. So then, yeah, then there's the infinite meta game, which is the sort of exploration of the cloud state in relationship to the liminal web, and how it sort of comes into the more cultural aspect. There's the cultural academy part, which I guess would be where I would sort of project the possibilities of the liminal DAO. And then there's, as you're getting closer here, it's almost like coming smaller in terms of size down to the individual. So here you've got the guild curation, which would be sort of housed within the cultural academy, whatever sort of institution we're thinking of in the future, to be able to transition us through the great filter. And then as you're getting closer, it comes into sort of group integration and visioning of the future, and then at the middle I've got this meta-modern spirituality. This is an individual transcendent space where you can begin to kind of like step into these different states of mind and going through different explorations. And so yeah, as you're sort of coming up here, there's all these sort of pod networks that almost bring you into the actual system or entity of the liminal DAO, or even if we just consider this as the sort of, yeah, the larger sense making space. And so, yeah, that's essentially it. That's the kind of overall, I think I've basically covered everything. So
Can you
Alex, it
take a
sounds like
picture of that? And so we could put that in the doc
Actually,
possibly?
is there a way, would it be too much to make that a digital document with like really short definitions of the lexicon that you're using?
yeah, this is
Not
this
that
is
you can say no.
this is definitely what's coming next.
Okay.
I guess I'm giving you like the first sort of overview of how it's initially kind of come out, and then I'm going to look at sort of how I can turn it into more of a sort of coherent model, because I can imagine it's a little bit sort of doesn't quite, especially the sort of separation and what's pulling them backwards and forwards. But hopefully
Yeah.
there was a
Yeah,
just a
for
little
me,
more.
it reads like a to-do list for the guy in Mind Connectome. It's like, okay, we got to do this, got to do that, got to do that, got to do that. Maybe those things happen in parallel in some ways. But I think naming those and then having definitions, I was enjoying some of the like personal lexicon. The Great Filter. I'm like, what is that?
Well, you can look that up. That's
Yeah.
a theory that's out there.
Yeah. Oh, okay, got it. Maybe I got gaps in my own information.
I mean, you did a
Good,
great
good.
job of defining it. So yeah, I thought that
Got it.
was. So I mean, that's kind of what I'm approaching as here, is like, how do we actually tell the storyline of how it goes into that next phase? You know, what are the different jumping off points that we can be like, okay, we've got to do, if it's a to-do list of how we get to there, you know, we're working back from the great filter of just assuming that we make it to this whatever solar punk future, or even just a viable future at all. What are the necessary parts that need to go into that? So you're almost kind of like taking it back from that larger assumption into the sort of tangible day-to-day. Okay, these are the projects that are actually most capable of doing that.
Yeah, I can imagine it being very helpful. I mean, first of all, like, great work on that. That's just something that's probably needed to be done by someone. So thanks for taking that on, is looking at it, that kind of narrative and conceptual framework, but also then having both that, I can imagine in a Bluepaper having that very big level, and then a zoomed in on the Conjure layer and having a more detailed roadmap of, you know, what Conjure's, what its role is in that bigger scheme, and then, you know, what it's got, what its next steps are in fully embodying that role.
Yeah, and I would want to make that explicit in that it's necessary to explain, I guess, the grand narrative to explain Conjure in a sense. Otherwise, you're just explaining the spatial web, right? You need both, essentially.
Yeah, and I mean, there's also the way of Conjure being a reflection of some of these larger entities as well, right? It's like, okay, if Conjure is the you know, the ultimate sort of space to be able to sense make, is that a reflection? How does that look in comparison to, say, the institution of education, to be able to make it through the great, you know, orientate society in relationship to making it through the great filter, for instance? So I think approaching it like that, like, this is the small scale, you're taking this big hyper object of climate change and sort of centering it into just this one entity as a reflection of that.
And how do you do that without scope creep, without actually articulating all of the nuances of the grand narrative, which is necessarily a hyper object, And then how do you articulate all of that and Conjure in a somewhat reasonable linear document like that? Yeah, you almost need like some magic to do that properly. So it might be necessary. And I think this is why Christian wanted this to be a blue paper rather than a white paper, is that it's more of a living document that continues to grow and change over time as we both better discern how to articulate this, as well as make progress on it, as well as the grand narrative playing itself out, right? And so there's a second dimension by which this can occur, right? If you think about a linear text document or a linear document as one dimension, there's a second dimension, which is the change across time. And then you can even think of a third dimension as a change across, or rather a distinctions across perspectives, or like, so you don't have to explain the education crisis. You can have that as like, it's almost like threads, you know, you can have, and maybe maybe what we're wanting to build here is like a wiki rather than a blue paper, a high dimensional space of articulation. But that also needs to be balanced with scope creep. So we've got to find that balance, obviously. But that feels like a very good direction to go in. And I almost think it's necessary that it needs to be multi-dimensional rather than a linear text document.
Yeah, I think multi-dimensional, but kind of like a contained object might be a useful framework here, where, because a wiki it's just, you know, it's infinite in principle. Whereas if we could identify, like, if we can think of this white paper as a three-dimensional object that can be viewed from different perspectives, then we can limit the scope of what we're generating to, let's say, 3 facets or 6 facets or something like that, where you've got 6 articles or presentations that are like the different sides of a polygon or whatever. So you could ask the question of like, what does this look like from the first person use case perspective? What does this look like from a super meta governance perspective? What does this look like from et cetera, et cetera? And in that sense, and it might even be interesting to have to incorporate a little bit of XR technology, XR engine in this as kind of like an interesting 3-dimensional nav, where you actually have a 3D object, maybe the cube, because it's Conjure and that's your chosen logo. So that would be six sides. And as you navigate these 6 different dimensions of the white paper, you see the different sides of this cube rotating, like a very lo-fi, but still 3D and interactive aspect. So the spirit of XR Engine is actually alive in the paper itself in some sense.
Just tapping in here, I wrote in the chat, I'm curious who in this group is the most, I guess, qualified to write a white paper. And if we could define this person, if they could potentially be someone to outline essentially the headline points, but maybe in a way that it's a question, so that we could outline what the questions that we have to ask to get these basic points of what every blue paper or white paper will need. I think that could be a good starting point as well.
Yeah. Ben Life, who unfortunately couldn't make it today, has a lot of experience in this. He's written loads of white papers for DAOs and other things, I imagine, as well. And Liam and Dimitri also have been doing this as industry leading professionals for a good while. Yeah.
I am currently employed as a white paper writer. Not that I'm that good at it. I mean, they're giving me money.
Good.
For Holochain, right?
Brandon, Ben, and maybe Liam or Dimitri. I'm down to look over any of those sorts of things. I read lots of white paper. I read a whole bunch of white papers that Benjamin sends me. That's like too many white papers. And once upon a time wrote application specs and still business plans and org dev stuff. So technical documentation, I'm good to review those sorts of things or add edits or critique or suggestions.
I wonder if anyone like top of head would say, let's just take provisionally the idea that we have a 6-faceted paper. What might one of those facets be? Maybe we can start to just like generate some perspectives.
Oh, also one more real quick. Zippy's gone today too, but I know Zippy advises on a lot of these sorts of things as well. So in terms of white papers, and that he's written quite a few, I would imagine himself. So he's in there.
And I write white papers professionally as well, but not for Web3 or software. So I don't know how much those skills might come in handy. But
oh yeah, I was assuming we were talking Web3. I've written other.
I also write. I also write white papers in a fragmented form, in the form of tweets.
We aggregate all your tweets. Does this mean that it's going to be a giant white paper?
I've actually been like slowly doing this, building out my own website, little digital garden wiki thing, and I just use Twitter as my like low energy
post-it notes
for now. I think honestly, all of that, all of what I would want to put in my own digital garden, my own kind of wiki thing, would go in the Conjure one anyway. So, and it is just articulating the grand narrative from many different perspectives and different points in that possibility space, right? So I really like the idea of getting these like a 6 or however many faceted kind of getting those directions put down would be really great. I think the obvious first one is the what, how, and why of Conjure. That's my Twitter.
And really quick too, Josh, you were saying about a wiki. There's quite a few white papers I've seen that have that technological framework of like, you can jump around inside of it, and it's got some little subcategories or like through clicks and other things like that. So I'm sure there's actually like an interface we could use that might be better in service to presenting it instead of just like a Google Doc.
Yeah, the ultimate meta move would be the catch-22 of building Conjure and then just presenting it in Conjure as this kind of hyper complex data visualization of the thing that it's trying to describe. Anyway, we'll get there one day. I don't know if everyone's read through
it's like the nerdy Donnie Darko or something like that.
Yeah, I don't know if everyone's read through the notes I took about what I think the Bluepaper needs to articulate. But I think this is more or less everything I think would be good for the scope. Yeah, I don't know if everyone has the doc open.
I think also just to touch on the one of the benefits I think of this, and might allow in some ways for the scope to increase over time, is the fact that you could be bringing people into it by the fact that you're showcasing it. And in some ways that's kind of how I've been looking at this in the same way, are there problems that we can solve within Conjure that then would relate to other projects? Or say for instance, okay, if we need to bring together an advisory team, if we need to be able to do that for other projects in the space, how can we do that for this one as well? And so I think that's another maybe an interesting kind of approach to it, is having it as some sort of evolving and moving thing, in the sense that you're sort of bringing people in to help map, but then also create the white paper that's kind of self-referencing, it's, you know, to the different projects, which is then in turn going to be developed into the 3D spatialization of it. Because yeah, I think this is kind of just to show you this other diagram actually, because it's kind of related. You see my screen? Is this working? Yeah, this was just a little map that I threw up to kind of try and kind of fractally understand where Conjure might fit. I mean, this is just an idea of like exploring the larger whole, and I've just kind of thrown in some names here to sort of represent different parts, in the sense that Conjure would be a sort of reflection of the Dojo in this kind of environment. It's creating that sort of ultimate game B environment. So you're doing that on a spatial sense, and then perhaps like an action project sense, and then more of a perhaps an educational sense making space, and then looking at it more of a kind of movement, and then as you know, a larger facet of society almost. So yeah, that was it really. I mean, I was just looking at like, okay, is there ways that we can look at these in relationship to a larger fractal version of it? And I guess trying to sort of see if there's problems that can kind of ride us up the stack, if you like, of recognizing, okay, we have this problem in Conjure. How does it relate to some of the other projects that are in the ecosystem or the scene as a whole? And then using that as a way of sort of bringing people into what's going on here.
Yeah, and something I very much want to keep in mind is Conjure as a project versus Conjure as an attractor versus Conjure as a immersive spatial web tool versus Conjure as a label, right? And that there are very specific dynamics to all of those, and that it just in the way we think about what we mean when we talk about Conjure, I think we all have a sense of what aspect of it we're talking about in the conversation, but articulating this to the world, I want to be very clear, and it may be that we need to change the labels and the language for each of those different things. It could be that we talk about, we only ever use XR engine to define the actual tools and the thing itself, right? It can't get gamed, right? If we allow the possibility for this to get gamed or audience capture or any sort of malincentive, in my mind, that is a failure, right? So it's necessary for us to deeply consider how we articulate the gameable aspects of this stuff. And as cool as those maps are, that in some sense is deeply concerning, because I don't want to be on the same map as Elon and Daniel and whoever, right? But it also is necessary that we have these maps. So how do we hold that tension, right? Especially because, you know, Liam and I have a what's it called? Financial incentive to XR Foundation and Hyperconstruct. And there's just lots of like those sorts of, there's lots of those dynamics as well. You know, we can't put our company at risk because it is funding the Game B digital future, as well as kind of, it's, you know, we're playing the parasitized Game A game. We've got to play that very carefully, or we can get well and truly fucked, right? A lot of dynamics there that I just want to be very careful of. And I don't know, Liam, if you want to speak to that, or Jarek, but I just wanted to raise those concerns. I fully trust that we will navigate this properly, but I felt like I needed to express that. Yeah.
Yeah, and by the way, like, you know, it's not suggesting that those kind of reflections need to be made. It was more just a kind of, and I'm not saying that Jared is, you know, a reflection of Elon Musk necessarily. I mean, you know, you can come to your conclusions, but yeah, it was more a case of just like being able to see, you know, where this can be sort of like expanded outwards or expanded inwards, or even just, you know, there might even be different sort of ways of mapping, and I was just kind of playing around. But yeah, I get what you're saying. It's this is a tricky one to navigate, and that's why I almost feel like it makes sense as an ecosystem, so no one's doing it alone type of thing.
Yeah, Josh, I wonder if you could, or Jarek or Liam, speak a little bit to those visions of possible failure modes captured by game A dynamics or whatever. That might be really useful context for us to have as we think about how to present this stuff.
And maybe also it would be good to actually articulate what we are trying to do with XR Engine and Hyperconstruct, and just how, and LifeScope and Copiosis, and how all of what we're doing kind of fits into you know, the grand narrative, or how it sits next to Conjure, because I think it would be good for the rest of the group to have a bit of understanding of what we're actually spending our time doing outside of just building the spatial web.
Well, when it comes down to me, you know, I'm here. I'm here really because, you know, Josh is bringing a lot of great ideas, and he's supporting my ideas, so I want to support his ideas. As far as functionally the canvas we're drawing on, you know, a few years ago, I was trying to build this like Google Maps in the web, so I could tell stories. I could tell, like, on the maps, I could put trips I've been on and things like that. I've now been building XR Engine, and I've thought of building mind palaces and building rooms and spaces that articulate things I think are very cool about history or nanotechnology or whatever, you know, make them kind of like, you know, rooms that are my notes, or, you know, I have, I don't know, 3,000 bookmarks and 500 folders, something like that. And I would literally be like suicidal if I lost all my backups of them, right? Because it's essentially, it is my grand library, you know, as good, because there is no library in my house. There's my bookmarks folder, right? And I'd love to spatialize that and curate it into an actual grand library, right? That's what I'm trying to do. When today we're talking about force graph, today we're talking about a grand narrative paper that could be a podcast, that could be a blue sky video, or it could be, you know, an experience, or whatever it is to aspire and espouse, right? It seems like we're very fast and loose on what that stuff is. You know, Josh, I leave what we're building in your hand. It's like, if you ever, you know, at Burning Man, if you ever seen a piece of art, there's usually one director of the film, one lead artist, you know, one Michelangelo painting the ceiling, right? And then we all fall in line. If you're asking me what to build, I have a few ideas, but they're not probably what Josh most envisions when he closes his eyes. You know, so as much as democratic as this is, I don't know. That's kind of how I see it, you know.
Well, it might be interesting to
I
explore.
would say, like, you know, let's fuck around and build a mind map. I'm really down to just very basic things of, there's a lot of cool, we have like 8 projects started for, like, we call them projects, but they're essentially like plugins, right? Or if you ever seen that on, you know, Unreal Engine or a game engine, there's like, hey, take the racing car template, take the first person shooter template. I would love to have a data viz template or a data viz toolbox, right? It's kind of what it seems like we're trying to start to build, or some sort of mind map or memory palette toolbox, you know, some way to, like, if you look at like we should just go into Mozilla hubs. It's kind of the best thing out there. And I've done this in Mozilla hubs. I used to do meetups in Mozilla hubs, and you can just throw links around and scale them and pinch them and put them around, and you can draw lines. You can literally just grab the draw tool and draw lines, and we can all prototype in there what we're kind of feeling, right? And see what we can make. Just make a bunch of shit, and see what feels good, you know. After all this, you know, a lot of talking. I'm actually going to do that right now. I'm just going to start a room in Mozilla hubs.
I mean, that's where my mind goes, is building a spatial mind map. I think is just a really practical application of space in general. But it's, you know, it's more about building the tools and letting people just have at it, build build useful things with those tools. I don't know exactly what those things will look like, but that's what I'm interested in doing here.
And one of the things that I have that guides every technical and conceptual decision I make about both XR Engine and Conjure is not just how to build these tools, but how to build the tools to build these tools, which is XR Engine and Conjure, right? It's not just about building a great set of tools. It's about enabling every single person to create whatever tools they need in as accessible and efficient and elegant way as possible. Yeah, a forge. And then how do you render those onto the commons such that there are no malincentives, right? And that's essentially what XR Foundation is actually stewarding. It's stewarding the open source commons of digital infrastructure itself for tools and tool making.
I wonder if you guys can speak. I mean, I understand we all have different visions. I could tell you what I got, what I want you guys to build for me as a pinto bean farmer in the desert. But what's the commonality between all of your visions in terms of what's on the development roadmap for XR Engine? Like what's in the next 12 months, let's say, what are you guys working on? And maybe we can generate a little discussion within this group about and what we see as the possibilities and how to best present that technology.
Yeah, so essentially the things that we see as necessary for us to be quote unquote successful is to be ready with a large user base before the Apple glasses launch in probably about a year. I don't think there's a definite timeline yet. I think they're targeting Q1 or Q2 next year, because that's when we have the most capacity to make large shifts, in the same way that the iPhone did. It's going to be a turning point in kind of the way people interact with the spatial web. The second thing being that we need to have the overlay, which is the software as a service version of XR Engine, which is the WordPress of the spatial web, rather than having to manage Kubernetes and Docker and AWS or whatever. You just fill out a few forms, click a few templates, and you have your own verse in the metaverse, or your own immersive digital garden, or whatever you want, right? And then that's how we're going to fund the next 5, 10, 50 years of development of this stuff, is by parasitizing game A, by creating commons tools that lower the barrier of entry to the spatial web in a way that Web 2 never could have, because of the incentives, and lowering the barrier of entry to exponential technology, or digital exponential technology, essentially. So from a technical standpoint, like 99% of the work is just making a freaking great video game engine that has all of these kind of technologies.
Could you say a little bit about what is going to be the draw for the user base you're wanting to find? Like how many users is that, and what capabilities is XR? Is it going to be mostly social stuff? Do you have a vision of that yet?
E-commerce is big. Blockchain gaming, NFTs are probably big. I imagine Liam knows a lot more about this. I don't spend that much time in that space. But yeah, the overlay is very much oriented towards e-commerce and capitalizing on that just until I guess we see how the space evolves once Facebook and Epic Games and Apple kind of push their cards onto the table over the next couple of years. I don't know if you're there, Liam.
Hey there, it cut out. Could you say what your question was again? I'm so sorry.
Yeah, just what you guys see as the roadmap for is explicitly what you're going to build with XR Engine that's going to bring in a large user base in the next year, or hoping
So
it will,
it's a combination of like template worlds. We're going to start off with everything from like clubhouses. Like the next one I want to build is like a tree house. We have kind of like a cool forum space. I just sent Josh a link to one of my favorites that Mozilla Hubs does that we're going to do a version of. We're doing
cut out for everyone else too. Yeah, looks like.
Yep. You there, Liam? We lost you.
tools that are just beyond anything else. It's going to be the drivers of the metaverse type thing. Then from there, it's a whole secondary. Yeah.
After you said tree houses.
Immersive e-commerce shopping and essentially immersive events, volumetric and motion capture events and live events. I think we have a lot of energy there. That's just ramping up. I think it's the midterm, like the midterm metaverse. The long-term stuff is really just all the experimental stuff coming out of the ecosystem, whether that's, concierge agents, procedural worlds. The stuff I really like is the real world, is like the latent, like, I don't know if you ever did Google Earth VR, but I was working on this time machine project I'm really passionate about that I think has 1,000,001 use cases of a digital reconstruction of the past using satellites and photogrammetry and all sorts of stuff, and building that as like a community toolbox. And these are the midterms things. While then the far term is augmented reality, which I think we're on a 2.5, 3-year flight path for, as we build these virtual spaces. Say, in 2022, 70% of virtual spaces are going to be accessed by people on the phone, 30% on the desktop, and like some rounding error of 1 to 2% on VR, and maybe some form of AR, right? And then as 2023 and 2024 and 25 roll out, it's going to get more and more immersive with virtual and augmented experiences that people do predominantly over mobile and desktop ones. That's what I'm seeing, and it's going to go from these like midterm experiences where I send you a link and you're in there with Katy Perry, and I send you a link and you're at your company, you're at like a company mixer, meeting with the Asia team and meeting with the Germany team, or going to the store and within a sales associate building out your favorite computer, or building out your room furniture, or redecorating, right? That's kind of the near-term stuff. The far-term stuff is going to be crazier and really be the emerging apps we can't think of that augmented reality will bring. So that's what we're doing now. That's what we're doing soon and later. I'm very much interested in, I don't know if Dimitri's still alive. I think he had to go. He's very much interested in building, doing what's like MIT Solid is doing, what Tim Berners-Lee is doing, and others, which is building data, like really clean data records of individuals that individual controls, being able to present it back to them, and being able to add IDs, DIDs, signatures to our history, so that when they are recorded, they are validated, cross-validated to be true. And you are not only the purveyor of your own history, but your own truth in these like metaverse, ubiquitous computing, whatever immersive computing scenarios that we're going to find ourselves in the next decade, computer vision, things like that.
just want to make a meta comment about, this is maybe naive, some thought everyone else here has already had, but just about the transition in the development of technology. It strikes me how much what we're developing today is thought of in context of like very complex interactions of technologies further down the road, and how it just didn't used to be like that. It used to be like, there's a new technological development based on needing to meet a real solution in the present day. Over time, all those different technologies do end up interacting, like a car engine needed the perfume sprayer, needed X, Y, and Z in order to exist. But now we're like kind of preempting the future of how all these technologies will interact, which is a little bit wild. I imagine it'll be a defining aspect of our era.
Well, and to touch on that as well is like, and this may be an unpopular opinion, I'm not sure. If this type of data viz tool set can be built on something as powerful as Conjure, in the long term, it can itself become a DAO tooling system. What essentially starts to happen is through the visualization of the various networks and ecosystems, and then through the voting mechanisms of kind of rising to the surface the best ecosystems, what we'll quickly start to learn is that the best ecosystems are actually the ones that are built from scratch, from the core on the systems that we're defining, which will really quickly, if this tool becomes one of the main dashboards for the metaverse, let's say, essentially eliminate all these other technology sets almost overnight. And by that, sorry. Well, I was going to say, by that, I mean like systems like DAOs that are built on Ethereum may not have as much value in them as the systems. And now that we can visualize the value that they actually have and the value that our systems have being intrinsic to being built out in the ways that are holistically self-aware of the tools that are being used and created for them, that essentially creates a big gap in where we are and where we will be. And in where we are, essentially a lot of that gets eliminated.
So I was going to make a very quick point, which is, who here has an Oculus Quest? Does anybody not have one? Yeah. Okay. For $300, you can just, if you go out, you can turn on an Oculus Quest augmented reality, world scale headset augmented reality right now. It's coming to the web very soon. We're going to build for it. There's going to be a color version. If you see how you can see through your Quest, you'll be able to see through in color. So we were talking, you guys were making the comment, oh, we're talking about future technology. No, we're talking about present technology. It's $300. It's at Best Buy. It's at Walmart. No, it's Amazon same-day delivery, like all over, right? To a billion people, can afford this thing right now, and incoming, with more reasons to buy every day. And I really think you guys should play around with more of them, because it's crazy. It's like having a smart. It's like if you know how to use it properly, you can play around with stuff. Like all the augmented reality stuff, I can send you guys links that's coming out, that's already out right now for the Quest, is pretty mind-blowing. It's like looking at the Apple II version of Excel and knowing where Excel is going. It's like it's very primitive versions of this stuff. It's becoming extremely affordable. I've had a Magic Leap for a number of years. And honestly, like there's, the thing is there's 10,000 times as many Quest developers as there ever were Magic Leap developers, and it's just like exploding right now, being shaped in a very quiet corner of the internet. So you guys should definitely check out what's going on right now as like a context setting, because it's wild. I'll send you some links.
I'm also illiterate about the current state of AR tech, except that I knew that there's very expensive Microsoft glasses and Apple's planning theirs, but Oculus already has like straight up AR. I didn't realize that. Yeah, okay. Wow.
Yeah, the current version will do it. It's in black and white, but they have more. They just opened up an API so you can put virtual objects on top of a black and white world, and they've said that by the end of the year they will have a color version, a color pass through augmented reality. So you'll see through HDR cameras, 4K HDR cameras on the headset, like cell phone cameras, and then it reconstructs reality through this like quantum dot screen, this like QLED screen. It's pretty crazy.
Gotcha.
The Quest 2 is essentially set up to be the developer device for this next high-end color device coming up this year. And they're already letting developers build for it. You can try it out as long as you're okay with black and white. So I just sent you guys this is called Custom Home Mapper. And it's actually a platform where you can like map your house. And then there's tons of them. It's crazy. Room Mapper, others, and games that are built on them, where you can semantically segment your house into like sittable areas, seat spots, table areas, doors, windows, inside, outside. You give your like room these kind of tags, and now you can play a first-person shooter. You can play a real-time strategy on the floor and the walls. You can move around a bunch of pictures. These and place them all over and redecorate, even theme your house, make it like, I got to show you, some of it's pretty crazy. It's like turns your house old timey and stuff like that. Yeah, it's pretty wild. But this really comes down to the like, this can be done in our VR framework right now. Once you've built essentially a model of your house and mapped it onto the play space, you can now redecorate your home, surround your home with all your memories, do all sorts of crazy stuff. Like the door is like open right now. Yeah, it's crazy. It's a gold rush.
Yeah, I think about AR futures all day. It's going to be so crazy.
The tech's there. That's the thing. There's just not enough development. It could be 10 times crazier. Like this
what
tech,
you're saying,
we've not reached the limit of what the software can do. Not even close.
but when you say that Oculus Quest 2 can already, you're just saying it has to use cameras and then it's redisplaying that.
Yeah,
imagery.
It's called video see-through.
Right. Okay. But the Apple is going to be like physical see-through, right? Like HoloLens.
Well, nobody really knows, but
So the other thing that they've said is they have internal builds that automatically map your entire house and automatically do a great job of like tagging tables and chairs and objects and things like that. And then they can map onto it. They just haven't turned it on because it freaks users out. Like Microsoft had a similar problem where they bought a company called PhotoSynth. They were doing photogrammetry, and they had a build of Windows 8, I think it was, where you go into the photos, you would upgrade from Windows 7 to Windows 8. And then you go into your photos, and suddenly all of your photos were 3D models. And they'd used their algorithm to reconstruct your family photos into 3D models of your home. And why did they never see this in Windows 8? Well, because they did user studies, and the users, like 50% of all users were like horrified by it, hated it, wanted it turned off, wanted their data deleted, freaked out. So they never shipped the feature. It's the same problem Facebook has. Their headsets can actually map and remember your house. They just don't turn on all the features that enables because it doesn't play well with users. Yeah, it doesn't play well with people's sentiments and their politics.
There's a funny story. I was reading the biography of Django Reinhardt, the gypsy jazz guitar player, and in his day, 20s, 30s, the bicycle was invented, and someone told him about this new contraption that only has 2 wheels but still balances, and he got so freaked out that he didn't leave his house for 3 days. That was a fucking bicycle. So yeah, I have to run. I'm gonna put a question out there, and this is the top of the hour. So anyone who needs to drop off, this is officially the end of the conversation, but I'll make Josh the host for anyone who wants to stick around. If you want to stick around, Josh. But one question that comes up in my mind a lot, and I don't know how much interaction this might have with Conjure or Bluepaper, but to me it's like a really important part of the conversation, is some future thinking about the consequences of these technologies. What will be the developmental impact on children who grow up with VR? How will that maybe in some ways create new affordances? It'll teach the mind to think differently, increase spatial recognition, maybe stuff like object rotation, and raise general intelligence. On the other hand, how might it like create severe dependencies and maybe increase schizophrenia or something like that? We have no idea really. So I'm always hoping that sooner rather than later, people are going to start, and maybe they already are, but really trying to study what the developmental psychological impacts of AR, VR technology are going to be on our future generations, because there could be all sorts of worms in that can that we don't even know about yet.
Yeah, the way I see it is that 99% of the possibility space is catastrophic and disastrous, and that the reason why I spend as much time exploring psychology and sense making and effective communication and metaphysics and all that shit is because that's just as important and necessary as actually doing the tech stuff. I think that's the reason why we are all in this group today, because we see both of those being equally as important. And coming to terms with the fact that you will be creating technology that will be devastating is not easy, and a thing you just continually have to deal with. And
oh, go ahead.
I think that's part of that on that map behind you, Alex, that having that North Star being, the solar punk protopia is important. And then being able to articulate why and how this is in service of that, I think is the ultimate goal of Conjure, right? Because every single other thing I've seen in this space has something disastrously wrong with it. Like from Meta to Wilder World, even the most kind of Game B adjacent oriented project out there, maybe. There's a few others as well, but there are just things I look at that and see and be like, no, that's wrong. That's not the thing, I don't know what the thing is, but I know that there are certain things that it's not. And this is just articulating that there are processes and ways of navigating that space, because it necessarily can't be defined. And I think that is like the crux ethos of what this Bluepaper needs to be able to at least point at. I don't know if it can be articulated, but it only needs to be articulated. That only needs to be articulated to the people who know that already as a thing that we can say that we're aware of, right? I may need to articulate that better, but I think that's all I have on that right now.
I get what you mean.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I think I agree that there will be tons of unforeseen consequences. Many of them have the potential to be negative, but I think it's also a matter of perspective and scale. It's like just now you said, you'll be able to, you've seen things and you've had an intuition, this is wrong, this is not the way things should be. But it's like the fact that you have the capacity to make that judgment means that progress is inevitable. And I think that it's things will go wrong, but it's like that's how we learn.
Yeah, that was also what I was going to say, really, was that it's by that nature of you being this, not that, it's already kind of has a directionality to it. So it's already being projected into the future from just that on its own. So even if you can't completely articulate how all of it would come together, I think doing that, you can do it from your own perspective, but I think especially once you start bringing in other perspectives and start triangulating, okay, where is that we are looking at, where does that project into the future as well, then it's sort of automatically, I think, in that sense, creates that environment in which it's saying, you know, it's all of these things, or it doesn't work. You know, it has to have the data ownership piece, it has to have the identity piece, it may have to have the reputational piece, like, you know, all of these different, you know, may need to be in service to the agentic model, you know, over time, and seeing the current Web3 as a kind of, you know, gateway to that. But yeah, I mean, to me, I think I think you already have the site enough to be able to be like, okay, cool. And then you know, if you need to be able to like reduce the scope, present, you know, a smaller frame that reflects the larger frame, then you can do that from your perspective, or your integration of those things that you can see.
And another thing that this paper, this group, this project needs to do is to decentralize this from me, because it's just obvious that this is like, I have certain things I can see that enable me to be able to do this, right? And there are necessarily also things that I can't see that will be blinding or whatever, right? So I need to find the right ways of offloading the stuff that's not for me to do, to the people that are the people who need to do it, and still have the connective tissue between all of the emerging things, which is also why I really want to dissolve the label of the project of Conjure at some point, and whittle it back down to just a deployment of XR Engine with some sick visualization tools, maybe on Holochain or whatever, right? So, and I think that that's like very far away. That's like many months, maybe even years down the track. But yeah.
In your mind, why would that be so far away? Like, why isn't that something that we can start with that consensus off the bat, that awareness? What value does calling it Conjure do for us now?
Just from my own perspective of it, I think at least even just by having a name, having we almost have to then give a frame. You know, it's like we have to then sort of create a border, because I often express the same thing. It's like, you know, if I'm the sort of container of once is this vehicle of transition, this sort of vehicle of emergence, moving us into something else, a kind of reflection of infinity. But then, of course, you can always, like, you know, put the frame at different points. So it's almost like, you know, having the part that is, you know, it can be around you as well. You can be a reflection of Conjure. You know, it can be the larger representation of whatever it is that you feel called to do. And then that can be something that we can then see, okay, well, this is, you know, there might be different, you might see it in a progressive sort of space of like, okay, this is how it may grow, this is how it may encompass different things.
So the way I would articulate that would be, the current state of the project is it's not adequately self-perpetuating, in that I have to keep putting energy in for the project to continue to exist. And the way I would say that gets done is using Forrest's triple of culture, values, and strategy, in that we have the right culture, we have the right values. Now we are working on the strategy that then instills the next fractal of culture that actually carries this into its next, form of evolution. When Jordan Hall explained the egregore concept, he used recapitulation theory to describe that there are certain structures, certain qualities that exist in a primitive form that then are recapitulated in the next form. So we are creating the meta culture that enables the culture of the post-Conjure community to take this thing to the next stage. That's the way I see it. And I don't think that'll be an easy process, because designing strategies to enable cultures is like, that's not even a thing you can do consciously, I don't think. It just has to evolve and emerge, right? And then also technically, it just will take a long time for us to build this stuff. Like, it's going to take years for us to build Conjure, because I'm pretty sure there are certain things that are impossible right now that we may need to just go in, like, invent new patterns and work with like Node.js, or work with these different huge industry giants, just to get small things kind of fixed or tweaked or whatever. And then also working with the entire metaverse ecosystem. There's just lots of things we could be doing that will, it's about getting community momentum across all these projects. We can't be XR Engine, XR Foundation alone. Like, we're part of a community. We have to both be a part of the standards as well as move the standards towards where they need to be, because no one else can do that because they don't have the right frames.
Now, you said we have the culture and we have the values. What do you mean when you say that? Because I feel like we don't have the culture yet.
We have the meta culture. We being this subset of the liminal DAO, being a subset of the liminal web, right? People who are oriented towards. It's exactly what Alex, yeah, that kind of those the circles, right? That absolute smallest circle of Conjure, that's the subculture, the meta culture I'm talking about, that then enables it to spread back out into the bigger circles. Which then is where the culture is embodied.
So do you feel like this meta culture that we have has gotten to the point of aligned values, or are we still defining that?
I don't know. I feel like we have aligned values. We just haven't articulated them, maybe. But I could be wrong on that. I'm not actually sure.
Cool.
I mean, that's also the benefit of mapping as well, is that you're also going to be able to see who are the other people that are doing these different parts, what are the places in which that cultural emergence might be able to come in, so that you can feed it into there. And so, yeah, I guess that's a kind of benefit there, is being able to see, and this is where I think it also comes into that question of, like, having the support and having the resilient network that's able to actually help with the sense making, and sort of also help in this kind of like self-recognition, and kind of stepping into a place of sort of self-assuredness in the decisions, and in the yes, this, not that approach of doing it. So I think all of those are kind of tied into it. It's like, us as the liminal DAO being able to project our significance and belief, and sort of put a stake of our reputation on the validity and importance of Conjure, is in some ways also the way in which you can be not only seen by the larger space, but also by the advisors, potentially by investors. I'm not saying that alone is what gives it its value, but at least it sort of helps to sort of also then understand, okay, we're also then mapping what else is out there as well, and sort of seeing, okay, cool, this is that piece, this is maybe where that can sort of feed into there. Yeah, that was just some of my thoughts. I might have to jump, by the way, because it's getting pretty late.
Cool.
Yeah, that's all right. I feel like we've definitely I'm at least nearing the end of my energy. So yeah.
Something to think about. It's tricky because we need money to build the things, but I'm really hesitant to build the things with money. And by that, I mean, I know that internally as a emergent collective superorganism, we really need these tools to self-organize and to sense make. I think that we need to build these tools for us to do that. But I don't quite think that we need to share those tools with the world until we can work out the details of how to actually figure out the proper feedback loops internally before we are able to share this publicly in any sort of way, really. But in order to do so, it has to get to a certain place in the process, which is a place that needs the funding to do it. So we're caught in these catch-22s. But at the same time, there's a lot of other projects that are happening where funding can start to come into play in alignment in different ways. And I'm wondering if there's a way that we can start to think about funding this, that we're not gonna have to make it public. So I think that's something to keep in mind, is like if there's a way that we can keep this internal and do the iterative processes over the period of the next year or two internally as a collective superorganism that maybe has some sort of metacultural agreement around some sort of meta value system, then that I think puts us in a decent place. But it just makes me really nervous to start to like build these tool sets and then be like, okay, well, we have a beta or something, we can release this to the world to raise more money. And it's like, yeah, but should we? Like, what, like, is that really something that we want to be doing? So that's something that just comes up for me.
So yeah, technically this can all be built in ways where there are very explicit permission systems. We already have some basic level of that where we can use proprietary closed source code, and we are using that for some of our clients with the systems that we've built in the engine. So that's entirely reasonable, and I agree. Yeah, and it can be that some of the stuff we're building can be public facing and be like, visualization tools for DAOs. There we go. Just have this world, and then the stuff that we're using is a bit more held closely.
One thing I've been thinking about around this is like, if you think about it in the sense that Web3 is a kind of embodiment of being able to absorb in economic capital to be able to build what they have an abundance of that, right? That's what they are not lacking in. Whereas say the liminal web is severely lacking in that because it can't explain what the fuck it's doing. It is not able to even, it has a hard time even defining itself or defining certain frames. It has a hard time working in that game A space. It comes from a totally different point. So it's like, if you look at those two different spaces as different currencies almost, you know, the currency of the liminal web is meaning. It is that new value system in some ways, in the sense that it's, you know, a compounding of insight and sort of philosophical thought as to what is the value system that comes next. And so that's in some ways a lot of what this is about in the whole kind of narrative piece, is to be able to then almost give a kind of sleight of hand as to what the next economic system is going to be like. It's saying we're playing with it here, and it's going to be about what is most meaningful to us as human beings. And so we could theoretically, we could literally like, if we can present the narrative of why this is important within a context, and use that as a way of actually turning that into the economic capital, but only in the way that we choose to do it, like only in the way in which, you know, you could use it almost up to the certain point as this sort of using meaning as a currency to some degree, by you sort of collecting all of these different parts of meaning and just being able to present these kind of opportunities to people in a way where if money is not important to them, which a lot of them, the most, you know, significant engineers, it's probably going to be the case, then you're able to then have them be working for something more meaningful and have that as being something there and something you can actually trade in the little parts if you need money. But for the most part, you might not even need to kind of transition it. It's almost like that difference of thinking between fiat, thinking in fiat currency as opposed to thinking in BTC, like thinking in that frame of like, I want more of this as opposed to have something I can trade for that. So anyway, yeah, that's just how I'm thinking about it in terms of using that as a kind of, it's almost like a recruitment tool, really.
Yeah, I wonder if Jarek, Turquoise, Liam have anything.
Yeah, I'm good. I think I've said a ton, but yeah, I'm gonna start screwing around essentially. I'll report back if anything noteworthy.
Nothing here. I've just been listening in and tracking with all of this. Yeah, I'm just listening in. I'm curious to hear back, Liam. And yeah, good stuff.
Well, I'm gonna go enjoy Easter. It's been fun, guys.
Thanks, Liam.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I got a piece, but yeah, it's been great.
Cool. Yeah, I definitely have a lot to chew on. Yeah, this all feels really good. I really don't have anything to say.
Something that's coming up for me, just a random thought. And maybe this is something that you tried to do today and it kind of merged into itself, but I'm wondering if there's a way that we can really explicitly outline separate times for theory and separate times for action and what these two different containers can look like. Most of our calls end up on the side of theory. And I mean, I know that we want to get things done too. So I wonder if there's a way that we can be really explicit about that, of like, this hour is for, we're just going to make bullet points, or we're just going to make mind maps, or we're like, whatever it is, of like, just throw out words and we're going to have somebody that's in here doing this, writing the things down. And this is what this time is set for. No theory, no outside potential, and then really create that safety for that to just be a progress making time. So that's just something I like to bring forth, is I think that exploring what that could look like would be really interesting.
Yeah, my expectations have been that these first few sessions for the now that we have the teams and we have the direction, is very much just kind of continuing that coherence, and I will definitely, I've just been feeling that I need to just let my brain kind of just absorb all of this, and sometime in the week, as I've done with previous sessions, is to just look back through this recording and take notes. And I already have a bunch of stuff I want to write, just making things I've got in my mind and things I've been noticing just more explicit and in text form. And then, yeah, I'm expecting in the next session or two that will start being very pragmatic.
Sweet. Awesome. Well, I guess I'm gonna head out too. Yeah, it was a great conversation.
Awesome. Thanks, guys.
All right, we'll talk soon.